NBA building blocks time. So favorite DFS plays at the following positions for the 11-game NBA slate coming our way this evening. So who are you going to build around at guard, Nick F?
I'm going to go with Seth Curry tonight at 7K going up against the Hawks. The Hawks are run. I mean, look, a lot of teams are running ragged right now, but the Hawks, especially losing Trae Young and Clint Capella, and now they're on the second leg of a back-to-back. They just got smoked by the Magic last night, and they were the favorite in that game too. And I know Tyrese Maxey is a good option too. He's off the injury report. He's at 6.7K, a little bit cheaper than Seth Curry, but the difference is that Seth Curry's been around, whereas Tyrese Maxey's been out. And Seth Curry's coming off consecutive 40-plus DK fantasy point performances. The Hawks have given up the ninth most DK fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. And again, they're shorthanded, so this is a big matchup for him tonight.
Garion, who do you want to build around at guard?
I'm just going to keep going back to Jalen Brunson. Things just keep getting worse in Dallas. I mean, this is someone who already, when it's just Luka who's out, I always kind of felt like Brunson was basically just Western Conference Fred VanVleet. He just plays all the time and does a little bit of everything, and he tends to bring back value. Well, he's finally priced like a Fred VanVleet type. He's $8,500 tonight, but it took literally every member of the Dallas Mavericks backcourt essentially not being available. There is no Trey Burke. There is no Tim Hardaway Jr. There should just be so many shots available to Brunson tonight. And yes, Kristaps Porzingis might play in this game. He's questionable. That really doesn't affect my viewpoint of Brunson here. If anything, if KP plays, that might be better for Brunson just because it might keep this game a little bit more competitive against the Milwaukee Bucks. But in his last 3 games without Luka, Brunson has averaged 39 minutes, and he leads the NBA in that span of time with 20.7 potential assists per game. That's not even including the points he's scoring and the rebounds he's grabbing and the steals he's racking up. Again, he just touches every category. And if he's going to play 40 minutes, it's really hard to ignore this guy.
Nick W., who are you going with at guard?
I wish I had dug up some potential assist stats. That's a good note on Jalen Brunson, but I'm going to keep going back to a guy who I feel like I'm talking about 3 times a week on the show, and that's DeJounte Murray. And his price is now, up over 10,000. He's at 10,300 tonight, going up against the Lakers, coming off of a 72 DraftKings point game in his last outing. He's pretty much comfortably topping 50 DraftKings points every single night this season. And you look at this matchup, Lakers remain a mess. They've lost 3 straight. They're, guys are in and out every single night. I think the one-on-one positional matchup against Russell Westbrook is super appealing for a guy like Murray, who can rack up a lot of steals against like the most turnover-prone player in the entire league. Not surprising to find that the Lakers are dead last in fantasy points allowed to the position. So that makes sense. I think DeJounte Murray, well worth paying up for at 10,300. If you want to save a little bit of money, I also like LaMelo Ball at Denver tonight. Nuggets are on the second leg of a back-to-back. He's at 9,900. And then assuming he plays on the second half of a back-to-back, I think he will. On the other side of that Jalen Brunson matchup, Drew Holiday at 8,300, I think is a really good price for a guy who is essentially their number 1 option when Giannis is out of the lineup. He's been fantastic over his last 4 or 5 games.
All right, who's a forward worth building your lineup around, Garion?
So I think Brandon Ingram has just been one of the best players in the Western Conference since the beginning of December, and he's really taken on more of a playmaking role for this team. And while, it's sort of, we've reached this weird place where generally speaking, you want to see like other quote unquote co-stars out because that increases usage rate. With some of these teams, you almost want some of these guys in there just because these scripts can get ridiculous, but no Jonas Valanciunas tonight for the Pelicans. So you'd have to assume that Ingram is looking at over 20 field goal attempts in this game, a usage rate well above 30%. He's averaging 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in the 9 games he's played so far in the month of December. 7 of those 9 games, he's eclipsed 40 DraftKings points. He's gone over 49 DraftKings points in 5 of those games. So his ceiling is super high going up against an Orlando Magic team that really just doesn't look like an NBA squad. I know they won last night, but their rotation right now is just some incredible stuff. They're the 2nd worst defensive team in the Eastern Conference by defensive rating for the season. So this just seems like a really good matchup for a player who's probably going to have like a 35% usage rate tonight.
Nick W., hit me with a forward worth building your lineup around.
Well, I have Brandon Ingram as well. And I think it helps his case that like 2 minutes ago, Nickeil Alexander-Walker entered COVID protocols. So, that's yet another piece for the Pelicans. 35% usage rate might be low for Brandon Ingram tonight. I think we could see a situation where he's, easily eclipsing 20, 25 shot attempts just by default So he's going to be a really popular play. You look at his last 10 games, 27 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, 51% shooting over that 10-game span. It felt like he kind of got off to that slow start, was injured a little bit, but he is fully back to being the guy that we've become used to seeing over these last couple of years. And like Garion said, Orlando, yeah, I know they got the win against a shorthanded Hawks team last night, but that looked like a G League team out there. They're starting players that, we're in like the top 1% of people who follow this stuff. I did not know who Hassani Gravett was. That guy's starting at point guard for the Orlando Magic. So they're on a back-to-back. It's a tough spot. Who knows what's going to happen in that game? I would not want to put any money down, on that spread or those money lines, but I think Brandon Ingram is going to be in for a huge night.
All right, Nick F., which forward are you looking at?
I love the Ingram call out of these guys, but I'm going to go with Karis LeVert at 7.7K going up against the Rockets. And he does run the risk of being chalky tonight because Malcolm Brogdon is questionable with that nagging Achilles injury that he's been dealing with. But even if Brogdon plays, and I know this isn't always popular, I still like LeVert in this one because Houston is one of the least efficient teams on the defensive end, and they're tied for 8th in pace right now. And I always like LeVert to cherry pick against bad teams. That's the biggest reason that I like him tonight. And Houston is also on the second leg of a back-to-back too. So a team that's struggling, been hurting with numbers. I know Wood was back last game. We don't know what we're going to see tonight from him. Either way, I think that this is an easy spot for him to go and at least bring you back value.
All right, which center has that building block potential, Nick W?
Ton of options on the slate here. So you can go in probably 5, 6, 7 directions if you want to pay up. My favorite is probably Embiid. He's at 12,000 against that Hawks team that we just mentioned. Is pretty shorthanded, doesn't have Clint Capella. John Collins is kind of like their only regular guy that you can rely on. Bogdanovich still a little banged up, although he did play last night. This is the tough spot to ask, some combination of Gorgie Jang and Onyeka Okongwu on the second night of a back-to-back to contain Joel Embiid, who's coming off of that 73 DraftKings point game against Boston, his last time out. So I think he's going to be a popular option, and for good reason. If you want to save a little cash, I like DeAndre Ayton. If you want to go down to 8,300, it's a good matchup against OKC. Not a lot to like about any of the options at center for the Thunder. Ayton certainly does not have the 70 DraftKings point upside that a player like Embiid does, but he's just been so consistent this season, essentially 35 to 45 DraftKings points every single night. So if you kind of want to fade some of those top end centers, save a little money, maybe pay up at guard, pay up at forward, I think Ayton is the direction you should look. All
right, Nick F., which direction are you looking in?
Look, I know every night Nikola Jokic is playing, you got to look at him. And he does have a favorable matchup against the Hornets tonight. And second most DK fantasy points allowed to centers this season. And coming off an off game for him, what was it, 29 DK fantasy points last night? Obviously not a great game, but when we've seen him post, sub 20 points, he usually bounces back pretty strong. That said, I am with Nick W on this one. I still think Joel Embiid is the guy to go with tonight. Atlanta's allowed the 6th most fantasy points to opposing centers this season. And, again, they're running ragged. They're struggling from a numbers standpoint. You don't have Clint Capella. You just got to rely on John Collins and some other guys who I just don't expect to do anything on that end of the floor against Embiid. And all around, they're not a defensively efficient team. So Embiid, I think, runs the risk of being chalky. Jokic might help you out on that end a little bit, but I think Embiid's a guy you got to have tonight.
All right, Garion, which center has that building block potential?
Yeah, actually building off Embiid, I think one of my favorite miniature game stacks on this slate is putting Embiid at the center spot and then putting John Collins, who is power forward and center eligible, at power forward at $7,300. He just seems underpriced considering what his role is going to be tonight. We saw it in Wednesday's game, and who knows, maybe we hear something where, there could definitely just be another outbreak on the Hawks that seems to be picking up steam every single day. But Collins played 41 minutes last night, 28 points, 12 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. He really brought it in every single category, finished with over 50 DraftKings points. If he sees anything close to that type of role again, which he probably will because they're just running out of players, I think the situation where Embiid hits his ceiling, he's going to need a somewhat negative game script or neutral game script, I should say. And in that scenario, it's probably John Collins who's just pulling the Hawks with his point potential to a 6 or 7 point loss. So I think both these guys complement each other's ceilings pretty well.
Nick F., do you think you can build around some value on this slate?
Yeah, there is one guy who jumps out to me, and I know there's a lot of value to be had right now. I know the Magic percent a ton of value going up against the Pelicans, and I know Cam Reddish had a big night last night, and people are going to want to go and back him up against the Sixers. But for me, Max Strus is the guy tonight that you got to go with at 5.2K going up against the Pistons. He's had 34.5 DK fantasy points or more in his last 3 games. One of those games was against the Pistons. And with so many guys out, Miami still needs him to step up. Detroit, not good against wings this season. And even if this turns into a blowout, I know right now the spread on DraftKings Sportsbook is at 10.5 in favor of the Heat. Again, Detroit won the last game, but even if this is a blowout, we just saw Strus go off for, was it 34.5 last game, DK fantasy points against the Pacers, and that was a blowout win for the Heat. This is a guy who's in a position right now who needs to prove himself. I know he got opportunities before, but nothing like he's getting right now, so he needs to prove he can stay a firm part of that rotation moving forward, and tonight he's going to continue to do that against the Pistons.
Garion, some value you could build around.
Yeah, I think you really do have to exploit that game, but I'm a little bit more inclined to find guys on the Pistons side, just with no Cade Cunningham, no Jeremy Grant. Frank Jackson is questionable in this game, so you're probably going to see a little Corey Joseph. I know Killian Hayes just seems like he's in the doghouse in Detroit right now, so I would lean towards 2 guys, one being Saban Lee, who just was kind of like the 2020 darling value play tended to be. He's been playing a lot more minutes lately, averaging basically a DraftKings point per minute with Cade and with Grant off the court so far this season. So he's probably pretty much a lock to reach 5-6x value if he's just playing 25 to 30 minutes. And then Hamidou Diallo, who's played over 30 minutes the last 2 games, should only see his role increase with Cunningham now in health and safety protocols. So there's probably like 4 Denver players below $4,500 that you could reasonably consider viable tonight.
All right, Nick W., what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're at this point now in the season where Hamidou Diallo has played 30 minutes in multiple games in a row can be said in the same sentence is kind of emblematic of where we're at. But I do like those calls in Detroit. There's going to be a lot of value there. I think with Jonas Valanciunas out tonight, Willie Hernan-Gomez becomes pretty viable for New Orleans. He's at 3,800. He's routinely been putting up 15 to 25 DraftKings points as a backup to Valanciunas off the bench. So I think he'll be in a really good spot with his minutes set to potentially double tonight, given their situation. I do like Onyeka Okongwu again at 3,100. I talked about him yesterday. He was on a minutes limit in that game against Orlando, but still got to 23 DraftKings points, had 3 blocks in 19 minutes. He's always really, really impressive in small spurts. So hopefully on the second night of a back-to-back, he gets a slightly extended workload, maybe plays a little more than Gorgui Dieng. And then Jordan Nwora down at 5,000. I mean, 32, 39, 50, and 36 DraftKings points over his last 4 games, respectively. Should play a lot again tonight for Milwaukee. I think there's a chance that maybe Milwaukee holds Holiday or Chris Middleton out on the second half of a back-to-back. Maybe they're looking ahead to that Christmas Day game. If that's the case, then I think Nwora becomes my favorite value.
All right, Slate approved pick time, fellas. So which bet is your favorite to build your bankroll? Garion, where are you going?
So I was trying to find a game that's like the least affected by COVID to maybe get like a relatively sensible read on it. I think that might be Knicks Wizards. The Knicks actually might have a couple guys back tonight in RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin. We'll see. They're out of the health and safety protocols. We know that sometimes it takes a game or 2 in terms of conditioning. But I like the over in this spot. Right now it's set at 211. The Wizards are kind of just like we've been seeing the Wizards be the last half decade, an over machine as of late. Their defense has been terrible, the 3rd worst defensive rating in basketball across the last 10 games. They have also hit the over in 8 of their last 12 games overall. I just look at the Wizards and yes, they're struggling offensively. Maybe that's the reason to not like the over in this game, but of all the teams on this slate, they're probably one of the 3 least affected by COVID right now. They pretty much have all their starters aside from KCP. So I just think this game isn't going to be pretty, but I think it squeaks over to 11.
Nick W., what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Garion kind of said it. There's so many games where you're looking at these spreads. You're like, the situations themselves are crazy now. Some of them are going to get even weirder by the time, the games tip off, 8 hours from now. But I'm going to go under 209 in the Hawks-Sixers game. The Hawks, they're a top 5 offense on the season, but without Trae Young, they have very few options. They don't really have anybody who can replicate anything close to what Trae Young brings to that offense. He's basically single-handedly carrying them to that top 5 ranking. They only scored 98 points on the Magic's D squad last night. It could be another big individual night for a guy like John Collins, but I don't think they're going to score, any more than that against this Sixers team that obviously, is mostly healthy and has some better defensive options, guys like Joel Embiid. So I think this is a night where the Hawks, maybe struggle to get to 90 points. So even if the Sixers, are easily over 100, I have a hard time believing this one pushes over that 209 total.
All right, Nick F, Slate Proof pick.
I like the Spurs money line tonight going up against the Lakers. It's at even money right now. The Lakers have not been hot at all. So not this whole season pretty much, but not hot at all since December 15th. That was that OT win versus Dallas without Luka. And in the course of that, since then, they've lost Anthony Davis. I know the Spurs aren't a great team on the road or really at home this season. They're 6-9 in both instances, and the Lakers are better at home. But with such a tiny spread, I don't mind looking at their records against the spread, and the Lakers are not great in these situations. The Spurs are much better too. So I'm taking the Spurs tonight to upset the Lakers.